How do you avoid plot holes in your story? Is this where plotting versus pantsing comes in? Yes, it absolutely can have implications on the success of your story. If you're plotting your story, you're much less likely to have plot holes because you know exactly where you're going and what you're doing, and you're writing to that endpoint, but you have the steps figured out. That does not mean that pantsing does lead to plot holes. It just leads to more plot holes and more likelihood of those plot holes and errors and issues. With plotting, meaning you're figuring out step by step what you're doing inside of your story, you are doing the heavy lifting up front, then you just have to write the book. You have no worries, you have no writer's block, it's fantastic. If you are pantsing, meaning you're figuring out the entire thing as you go, you can write through your story, but then all the heavy lifting comes after in editing because you have to fix all the issues that you had while you were figuring it out as you went. Now, a way to make sure that you're avoiding plot holes is to write really tight. A lot of issues come when people are time jumping or they're skipping around inside of their story or they're not writing in order. Some people will write novels and they'll write a chapter and then get stuck and like jump very far forward in their story and they'll just write all over the place. So sometimes they'll write chapter 1, then they'll write chapter 7, then they'll come back to chapter 2, that kind of thing. That leads to issues. Don't do that. But we want to make sure that we're writing as tightly as possible, as long as you don't have time jumps. So we're not going like a week later. That's going to save you. I write very, very tight. There is absolutely no room in my manuscripts to insert anything or to take anything out. And that's what we want to be doing when we're writing our novels. We do not want scenes or sections of our story that can be taken out. If those things can be taken out and everything still makes sense, that should be taken out. That's called editing. We're removing anything that is not necessary to furthering our plot. So if you're writing really tight, where you're writing every minute of the day, more or less, you know, we're not being ridiculous about it, but you're getting a small time frame for this, it's going to help you to make sure you're more in alignment with your story and less likely to have those plot holes. So you're looking specifically to be writing very tight. We don't want gaps where people can come in and say, okay, you need to add something in here. Here's the section where you've got a gap of time, multiple hours, multiple days, multiple weeks. Time jumps are not your friend. Don't do it. You can, but you got to be very smart about it. You also have to be aware of your surroundings. We are not writing stories where we are going to be forgetting what we're doing. An example that I've seen given a lot by authors that other people have done is when a character walks into the room and they stand up from a couch and then they walk somewhere else and then all of a sudden there's no couch in the room, right? We have to be very, very mindful of the world building that we're creating. We do not want people to be forgetting what's happening in the room. If you walk into a room and there's a person next to you and that person suddenly disappears, they're just not there for chapters, that's a problem. So you have to keep track of who's there and what's going on, which is why it's incredibly important to have notes on your screen. This is what I do when I'm writing, and you can see it as part of the Show Me How You Write series on youtube.com/KMRobinsonBooks, where I show you my on-screen writing process. I have a running timeline next to my manuscript. So 3 main screens on my computer. It's going to be my timeline, which is the chapter number, the page number in the Word doc it starts on, and then every bullet point that happens during that chapter. Then chapter 2, the page number, every bullet that happens there. This keeps you aware of what's going on. It keeps you aware of who's in the room. It keeps you aware of what furniture is in the room if you need things like that. If somebody got an injury and you've just magically forgotten that for a couple of chapters, that's a problem. So you're keeping all of those notes in your running timeline. You can also do this in a third screen on your screen next to your manuscript where you are keeping a running list of all of your character information. I do this to track injuries. So when I'm writing my character descriptions, it's things like eye color and hair color and length and the way that they dress and who they're related to and words that they say that maybe some of the other characters don't say or phrases that they use a lot. I'm also keeping track of when they're getting injured, if something's happening to them, if they've lost someone or something. I'm keeping track of all those things so that as I'm writing, that's still there. And you can even make side notes of what point in the story that happens in case you need to look back during editing. So you want to avoid plot holes by making sure you're aware of your world building, you're aware of everybody in the room and all the things in the room, you're writing very tight so that you cannot fit things in or pull things out and still have it make sense. You also want to make sure that you're writing chronologically in terms of your book so that you're not jumping from one place to the next and then missing things. Plotting is for sure going to help, and I recommend 95% of new authors are plotting rather than pantsing so that you don't have to do the heavy lifting after the fact. But it really comes down to you being aware. You have to be a responsible, aware writer. If you can't be on your own, keep a running list. Have tracking guides next to you. Have extra paperwork to make sure you know exactly what's going on so that you don't mess up. And then you have to go back and double check yourself. And then you have to get beta readers. And then you have to have a professional editor come in and make sure you're not screwing things up. But you know yourself. You understand if you have one of those brains that jumps around places, and you're going to need to do more to keep yourself in track and on alignment with what you are doing. You also know if you're somebody who is extremely focused on what you've got going on so that you can do a little bit less of those things. Sometimes it's just a little bit of trial and error, but your job is to avoid those plot holes by whatever means necessary, and that can look different from what I do, from what he does, from what she does, from what they do, from what you do. And it's okay to be a little bit different as long as you're aware of these things and you are navigating them and mitigating some of those things so that you don't have to deal with it on the back end. Questions, comments, go ahead and drop it down below. We want to make sure